Okay, colleagues, welcome to the second session of today of the RISA track. We've got exciting speakers that will be delivering some talks to us. So it is my honor and privilege to welcome our online presenter, More Chinakidzwa. More is a researcher, academic, and administrator. He's a program coordinator for the Masters of Technology in Strategy and Innovation at the Harare Institution of Technology. He has more than over 13 years of experience spanning academia, banking, and marketing. His research interests are in research data management policies, regulations, strategy, innovation management, SMEs, digital marketing resources, capabilities activities, and market performance. More holds a PhD in marketing in South Africa, MA in international business from UK, MBA international business and management from the Netherlands, and a B.Tech honors in international marketing in Zimbabwe. More will be sharing with us on privacy issues in data sharing. Over to you, Dr. More.
Thank you, Stambiso. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me very well. Let me share my.
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Thank you. Okay. It is my pleasure to be here today. I will be sharing with you my presentation on addressing privacy issues in data sharing. I've been doing a number of researches now, looking into data sharing, how it can be improved, motivations, practices, and behaviors of researchers when it comes to data sharing. And there are common things that I have noticed in all those studies. There is a common trend, there is an agreement that researchers appreciate the need for data sharing, but in reality, you find that less is being shared. And in that respect, I presented before in previous conferences some models, proposals on what can be done. So today I decided to focus on one of the issues that I also found to be a hindering block to researchers when it comes to data sharing. So today I'm going to be speaking on these issues, my proposals on what I think can be done to improve sharing when it comes to data. And just to give you an overview, as I was saying, there is a convergence that there is need to share data, and the benefits are all known, but in reality, you also find that less is still being done when it comes to sharing because of several reasons. You can talk of infrastructure, you can talk of resources, you can talk of capabilities, but today I'm going to be zooming in on one of the aspects, which is privacy issues. So privacy is one of the key barriers when you look at research sharing because of several things as well, legal issues, ethical reasons. Maybe when you collected the data, you did not have enough consent or you did not get consent to share the data, commercial concerns, especially when you are looking at industry-funded research. To what extent can you share such findings? What extent can you share such data that has been sponsored by private partners? So all those issues also, in the end, put a stumbling block when it comes to data sharing. So some researchers have flagged the need to retain some levels of control for their data. They still believe that it is my data, it is my private data. I still need to have control. I still need to regulate who put his or her hands onto the data. And also knowledge deficiency when it comes to data management plans. When we as researchers start our research projects, the kind of data plans that we put in place also determine what are we going to be sharing at the end of the day? What kind of data can we share at the end of the day? What can we do with that data at the end of the day? So the knowledge deficiency in coming up with good data management plans is also another hindrance when it comes to addressing privacy issues, when it comes to data sharing at the end of the project. So I have a few suggestions, one of them being to produce sound data management plans, obtaining informed consent, anonymization, data access controls. Of course, all these things can be in a data management plan. But I decided to zoom in on them because there are some of the things that I found to be critical, essential, yet researchers still ignore them or do not give them the value that they deserve. And in the end, that becomes a major stumbling block when it comes to data sharing. So major concerns with regards to data sharing issues that I'm going to be referring to here are issues to do with cost recovery, commercial issue. There are reasons that because maybe the data was funded privately, there are some commercial concerns, so we cannot share. Legal and ethical issues. You will find, for example, I will be giving more reference to GDPR, a regulation that stipulates how do you share data, who do you share with, under what conditions, what should you do with personal data, and so on. Mostly applies to the EU, but also to every researcher, everyone who collects data for European citizens. So you might be having a collaborative project. You have got partners in Europe, and you are here in Africa. What are you going to do with that data? How are you going to share it? So in the end of the day, such regulations will also have an effect on the way you share your data. Then concerns with the misuse of data, then privacy issues, which I'm going to be zooming on. So basically, when we are talking of privacy, we are looking at the right of an individual to keep his or her information private. So when we collect data, when we collect, sometimes we collect personal data, and that person has the right to have that data kept private. And that also impacts our sharing efforts. So privacy advocates for individual control over collection and use of private information with the goal of protecting confidentiality of an individual. And that calls for action, that calls for researchers to be able to come up with appropriate mechanisms from the onset on how they intend to collect the data, how they intend to share, how they intend to handle those issues of privacy. So why is privacy important in data sharing? It protects all parties. It protects the researcher, it protects the participants, it protects whoever has access to that data, to avoid harm, discrimination, identity theft, especially nowadays with this digital environment. There is so much identity theft going on, fraud cases. So it is important to maintain privacy so that we avoid reputational damages, also avoid legal battles. There are so many companies, big companies, that have been fined because of failure to protect the privacy of individuals. So the issue of privacy is now becoming more and more important, and the fines can be very huge if you fail to protect the privacy of your participants. So what are the primary expectations and considerations when it comes to addressing privacy issues? We have to consider the sensitivities around collecting data. When we are collecting data, what kind of sensitive data do we collect, and how are we going to handle it? How are we going to process it? Transparency in the data collection process and use itself. The participants have to know, how are you going to use that data? How are you going to process it? Where is it going to be stored? Who is going to benefit from that data, and so on, such kind of information. Then minimizing the amount of personal identifiable and sensitive information collected. If possible, you need to minimize personal data. And that saves you when it comes to data sharing, because you don't need to worry much, because when it comes to data protection regulations, mostly they address personal data, identifiable data, data that can be linked to individuals. So if you can minimize the collection of such data, then it becomes a plus when it comes to your sharing efforts. Then creating and implementing security policies that protect data and uphold individuals' privacy and dignity. You will realize that security policies are also critical when it comes to sharing. As much as you want to uphold the privacy of individuals, you also want to make sure that no unauthorized person lays his or her hands on the data that you have collected. Then creating an end-of-life policy for post-project data management. So all these things should be in place for you to come up with a sound plan on how to share. For example, here I've got a case from India where the government is planning to share all data, publicly collected data that is from government institutions. So government to government use where they collect data and they want to share that on a payment basis. So the policy will be applicable to all data and information created, generated, and collected by the government directly or through ministries, departments, or authorized agencies. So which means every data that the government holds is shareable unless otherwise specified. That's when they will then need to look at restricted access to that data. But what kind of implication will this have when it comes to privacy? What kind of implications does this kind of policy has when it comes to the legal side of things, ethical side of things? So it brings to us several questions. For example, to say, does collecting data automatically give free dissemination and access rights? If you're a researcher, you are a government institution, you collect data, does it automatically give you the right to share that data? Which are critical questions that I have found to impact our efforts to share data as researchers. So is it not a direct violation of people's fundamental rights to privacy when you share their data because you have it, you have access to it, you have collected it? Is it now your data? So can cybersecurity, data protection, and privacy law be a solution? Which are some of the key questions that we need to address as researchers? Is if you look around most markets, you'll still find that the issue of cybersecurity is still in its infancy. Data protection laws, privacy laws, they are still at their development stage. And what contribution do this make when it comes to protecting privacy, when it comes to pushing for the whole idea of data sharing? Then when the participants give consent, what are they consenting to? Is data sharing included? Another weakness that I also discovered in with most researchers, when we seek consent, we are seeking consent to collect data to use it in our particular study. But when we want to share the data, did we obtain consent to do so? When participants consented to us collecting their data, to using their data in our study, did they also give us consent to share it, to give it to Organization X, to give it to our partner who is in Europe, who is in the US, and so on? So these are some of the key questions that we also need to have in the beginning of every project, so that whatever data that we generate, we will not have problems when it comes to sharing it. So to address some of these issues and answer the questions that I was posing, I am proposing that every researcher should come up with a robust data management plan. This has been said several times in discussions to push for data sharing. But in reality, you still find that most researchers are not able to come up with data management plans. Sometimes as researchers, we come up with data management plans when we are looking at collaborative projects, when we are looking at projects that are funded because it's a requirement for funders. But even in those small projects that we have at institutional level, those small projects that we have even with our students, are we coming up with a plan? Because it's a culture also that we have to develop at an early stage. So my proposition is we need to have data management plans for every project, for every research. And in this data management plan, that's where we define how we are going to collect the data, how we're going to process that data, how we are going to handle it, how is it going to be shared, and all these things, the issues to do with obtaining informed consent, how are we going to do it, and what kind of consent are we going to be seeking, the issues to do with data anonymization, the issues to do with access. At what point are we going to make it open? At what point are we going to be restricting access? All those things, they are then defined in your data management plan. So here I zoomed in on all these things as well, as much as they can be covered in your plan, but there are key variables that I think every researcher needs to think carefully about as you come up with your study, as you come up with any project in terms of obtaining consent, to include aspects to do with data sharing, so that when you want to share your data, you do not have issues. Your participants have consented to it. They have given you the right to do so, because merely collecting data does not mean that you are allowed to share it. So with regards to data management plan, it is a key element of every research project, because sharing starts with a sound data management plan. And in this, that's where, as a researcher, you think ahead, you walk through your project, you think around issues to do with security, privacy issues, sharing, accountability. All these things are defined in that plan. So it allows you to go through your project. It allows you to think about how you're going to handle every data that you're going to collect, who is going to have access, under what conditions, when you're going to share, which platforms are you going to be using, how are you going to address privacy issues, how are you going to address these security issues. All those things, you are able to define them before the project begins. So data management plans become central in every study. Right, I've got another case again here that I extracted from the UK, for example, where in some countries, you'll find that there are restrictions on their export controls, restrictions on what you can take out of the country. And data is one of the items that is restricted. As much as countries, we know they restrict export of goods, some products and so on, but data is also one of the items that countries can restrict, like the case that I give here for the UK, where they can, you have to seek approval to take out some data and so on. So these are some of the things that you can address now in your data management plan if you know the regulations of the country that you are going to conduct your study, where are you going to be sharing it, who are you going to share with. When you think through all those processes, it allows you now to come up with a plan, to check the legislation, to check the regulations, what is required, what do I need to do for me to be able to share in the end. Because going into the project without understanding some of these things will then impact negatively on your sharing efforts when you later realize that the legislation does not allow you to share the data. The legislation does not allow you to share the data if you have not fulfilled X and Y. So the next thing is to have informed consent, which is you need to check permission to share the data. From the word go, when you collect the data, you need to define elements to integrate into the consent form, not merely asking the researcher for the authority or permission to collect data, but also asking for the permission to share the data, to hold the data, and even specify for the period that you're going to be holding the data, what rights does the participant has. These things, as simple as they might look, but they will have a huge bearing when it comes to data sharing. So we need always to obtain ethical clearances, protect safety rights, participants' well-being of the researchers, all participants, add a statement of data sharing, archiving, so that participants have informed decision-making. They know what's going to happen later on with their data, and also understand the context, consent in your context. You also realize that the idea of giving consent is contextual. In some studies, if a researcher a participant simply says yes, tick yes, then it's fine. In some countries, in some areas, you will realize that if you give a participant a whole document, 10-page, 15-page document, where they don't even understand some of the words that are there, the legal jargon that is there, that document may be considered not to be consent. There is now a requirement to make it as simple as possible. So you have to understand as well in your field what constitutes consent. Like for example, here I had made this extract from the GDPR. It was from Dragia's presentation when she was analyzing the provisions of the GDPR. That the legal basis for processing, for example, health data is governed by 2 articles from the GDPR, that there needs to be a clear and explicit affirmative consent, clear, explicit, and affirmative. So now you see sometimes when we are given those consent forms where we simply tick yes, and the whole long document, according to this, it might not be considered to be consent, because the understanding is the participant did not really understand, it was not clear, it was not explicit, it was a long document, legal jargon that participants could not really make good sense of. So to obtain informed consent.
Just a minute to round off.
Okay, thank you. So here I've just listed some of the things that you need to obtain informed consent from participants. I'll skip that because of our time. There is an example again. Anonymization is one of the other issues that you can address to make sure that the identity of individuals cannot be pegged. And in some countries as well, there is need for irreversible anonymization so that no code, nothing else can be able to identify the original object in that study. So here I just explained more on the anonymization aspect, legal issues again, some cases on how you can handle. There is an example here. For example, when you're having a project where you have partners in Europe, partners in Africa, you invest say in Europe, then you invest in Africa, then you've got another company, say company Z, which is collecting data on your behalf. Maybe you're conducting some random control trials. Who has the responsibility of that data? Who is accountable for that data? Issues to do with that, we need to be very specified in the beginning. Then data access controls, where you can have open access, where everyone can access the data, then access for registered users. You can have restricted access, which is access is limited and can only be granted upon request. Then we might have an embargo, where you make the data available after a certain period of time. So these are some of the things that you can do to address the privacy issues and at the same time to meet the needs for data sharing. So in conclusion, we just need leadership from everyone, research institutions, funders, academics, to come up with proper mechanisms that promote sharing, that promote or protect privacy of individuals, and in inclusive systems. Then in the end, combining data management plans, gaining access, gaining consent, anonymizing, and access issues. And for all this to work, there is need also to look into the context of the data in terms of the markets, the data type, the population, the purpose, and so on. Thank you so much for giving me this time to share my presentation. I end here.
Thank you, Dr. More, for sharing those insights, sharing on privacy issues, on data sharing, how we avoid legal battles. You touched on or emphasized on DMP. Maybe something to think about. Data knows no boundaries. I know that you touched on export controls, but those are some of the things that we need to engage on. I hope that you will be still online at the end of the session so that you can take some questions from our participants. Again, thank you so much for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.